Hello, and welcome to the second series of Around the World in 80 Teas. My name is Sharon Hall, and I'm the Chief Executive of the United Kingdom Tea and Infusions Association. And today we'll be talking about tea grown in the British Isles with my co-host Will Battle and our guests, Jonathon Jones and Alicia Gentilly. Now, Jonathon Jones is one of the pioneers of British grown tea. He's received the OBE for services to international trade and commerce, and he's best known for developing the UK's first homegrown tea company at Jonathon in Cornwall and making the most British tea in history as managing director for trading at the Jonathon estate. He has experience in both botany and business and loves to encourage others to grow more, both in the garden and in their businesses. He says there are huge opportunities to do better business, especially caring for the environment. He believes there are immense trading opportunities for a new roaring 20s, pandemic notwithstanding. And he's the chair of the Cornwall Agri-Food Council and serves on other boards as well. Jonathon has recently been awarded the Freedom of the City of London, which is a great honour. And in China, he is known as the Tea Man. Moving on to Alicia Gentilly, who's joining us today from Jersey. She's the current project manager and tea maker for Jersey Fine Tea. And she's been working in the tea industry for 10 years, doing everything from working on a herbal tea farm, packing in tea at imports, managing tea houses, and processing tea in America. She is thrilled by all aspects of tea and continuing to learn about this captivating beverage. And she adds that improving her tea making skills is a key focus in her life. Alicia is an active member of the European Tea Growers Association, the European Specialty Tea Association, and the United States League of Tea Growers. And finally, to my co-host, Will Battle, as you all know, of Fine Tea Merchants. He's a UK-based tea wholesaler with 25 years of tea experience. He's also the author of the fantastic World Tea Encyclopedia. Will, Jonathon, and Alicia, welcome to Around the World in 80 Teas.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
So lovely to have you all here today. So today we're going to talk about tea grown in the British Isles. If we ask most consumers where they think tea comes from, they'll probably say India, China, or Sri Lanka, whilst actually most of the tea we drink here in Britain comes from Kenya. But tea is now grown in more than 60 countries around the world. And you might be surprised to hear that some of that tea is grown very close to home in places such as Cornwall, Scotland, Wales, and Jersey. Let's find out more from our guests. I'll hand over to Will.
Thanks, Sharon. So perhaps, Jonathon, you can set the scene. Tea's only really been grown in the British Isles since comparatively recently, about 1999, I think. Why, as a tea drinking nation, has it taken us so long to grow our own?
You're right, Will. And Churchill had the same question back in the 1940s. He knew that we needed to produce our national drink on British soil, and it took us, 70 years to finally make it happen. But I think there's lots of reasons, aren't there? You know, this country was right in the heart of the tea industry for hundreds of years in trading it and taking it around the world and botanically being brilliant at it, as well as being great at blending and creating tea blends. We understood how the tea bush grew and a nation of gardeners, if you like. So we took tea bushes to lots of those places, including Kenya, you mentioned, where most of the British blends come from today. It's really the British that pioneered it there, but there wasn't therefore a great need to bring it home, if you like, and put it into British soil. So it was a bit of a romantic project, but also I think it felt like it was coming home and it deserved a trial. And I only recently found a book actually written in about 1900 that said Jonathon should consider a British tea plantation. So I thought we discovered something new in 1999. They knew about it 100 years before.
Fantastic. So I mean, what conditions are needed in order to grow tea remuneratively?
Well, that's the key thing, remuneratively. So anyone can grow tea, and we sell literally thousands and thousands of tea bushes every year to all across the UK, the Channel Isles, Scotland, and it's great to encourage people to understand what is still the world's #1 drink, isn't it? And so we love the idea that there are probably tens of thousands of little tea gardeners all over the UK, and that's fine and it's fun, and it opens people's eyes to how difficult tea is to grow and do really well. But so it's an education job, but actually to make a profit out of it is very different. And we always advise people on our tea training courses here that if you want to make a small fortune out of a large fortune, then grow tea, because it won't make you a lot of money. But here we're very fortunate. We have got a microclimate like Darjeeling, thousands of acres of Tregothanan land. Probably of that, only 150 acres are really suitable for commercial production. And we can talk about that in a bit more detail, why that is. But we're never going to be a new Assam or, Kerala or, even the sort of regions from Africa. It's just not going to happen in the UK or even Europe. We're already the largest tea gardens in Europe, and I don't see us growing massively more than what we already have.
So perhaps we could bring in Alicia here, and maybe Alicia, you could tell us a little bit about what it's like to grow tea on Jersey. I know you grow a lot of potatoes on Jersey, but tea is fairly new, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I think there's been a push recently to develop more sustainable agriculture projects here in Jersey. So the company that I work for kind of decided to capitalize on that. And it was about the same time that tea started growing in Scotland. And they're like, oh, we could do that here. But Jonathon is right. It's never going to be quite the same capacity as other tea growing regions, especially here in Jersey. We're very limited in the amount of land that we have. Labor costs are much higher than in other tea regions. Also, too, we're just not going to get the kind of yields that they get here at Jersey Fine Tea. We're doing absolute specialty tea. So, bud and top two leaves only. So our yields are much smaller, where if we wanted to do kind of more of a rough pluck and lower grade, we could maybe produce more. But I think to make the kind of money, that's the angle that we're taking anyways. So it's challenging in that aspect.
How would you say, what is it about? Well, let's ask you first, Alicia. What is it about Jersey that makes it suitable? Whereas, for example, there's no tea gardens in Lincolnshire.
Sure. Jersey's actually a great place to grow tea. The soil here is perfect, at least on the east coast of the island. We have great terroir. We have a lot of coatees that we're planting on. So they're small sheltered plots of land. There's a little bit lack of rainfall that we make up for by drip irrigation. So other than that, they do quite well. We do have other challenges that include a lot of pests. But as far as the tea growing region, we have a great climate for it. We have pretty mild winters and warm summers. So pretty long season. Similar to Darjeeling. So.
Jonathon, in Cornwall, you were talking about your 150 acres that's really optimally suited on the Tregothanan estate. What is it about that area, the microclimate, that makes it so special?
It's a combination of soil, rainfall, winter temperatures, day length, distance from the sea. That's some of your key, real critical players, if you like. And as Alicia was saying, in fact, we were very happy to host your colleague from the Jersey Potato Board here in the early days before you went into the tea growing. So it was very good to see that actually being put into play. But the difficulty a lot of tea gardens are having is their proximity to the sea. And salt and tea, as you well know, do not go, or if you do mix them up, you end up with a very interesting Japanese style coastal tea, which is fun to do, but not what you're necessarily looking for if you're making a black tea. But for us, it's about having the right rainfall. It's about having a long season. So we pluck from April to October, but we make some of our best single estate teas actually in January, February, and March, because you get little amounts of really interesting, very intense leaf. So we're virtually frost-free, but nowhere in the UK is totally frost-free. And we have very acid soil. We are the first place in the UK to grow camellia ornamentally over 200 years ago. So there's an amazing botanical legacy, if you like, which I was able to tap into. And a family that own Tregothanan are literally preparing for their 700th year here. So that's farming on a scale which is so sustainable. You can hardly get your head around the fact that they have been farming this land as one family for 7 centuries. And tea, as you all know, is incredibly sustainable if it's done well. I've seen those tea bushes in Japan as part of my research that are still producing tea 400 years in. So it's trying to find really small areas that don't need irrigation, that don't need protective covering. There's a lot of people pushing back against the use of plastic, and the thing is, one side of me, the gardener side, the botanical side, says, great, let's grow a really challenging crop, which tea is, in a really challenging place. But life's too short. We just need to grow great tea in a really good spot. So we don't need protective environments. We're very fortunate we don't have any of the pest and disease problems that the rest of the tea world have, because we're a new tea region. So as long as we keep our guard up and don't encourage people to bring tea bushes home in their luggage from China or India or wherever, then we hope that with good biosecurity, we'll be able to keep the mainland UK as a kind of a very clean, good place without having to use chemicals to grow tea.
And Alicia, do you have a similar cropping season to Cornwall?
Me too, yeah. Yeah, it's April through October, although this year we had a very cold spring, so really didn't start flushing and picking until around May, which was unfortunate. But normally, yeah, April through October is our plucking season. It's interesting what Jonathon said about pests, which is right. We don't have specific tea diseases here, which is amazing, or the normal kind of pests that people get in, say, like India or something. But as a new tea growing region, at least our experiences, we're finding that we're having issues that no one's had before. We had a really big problem with rabbits. They were chewing around the stem of the plants, and then the whole thing was dying. And it's just, that was really challenging to deal with. And then the rats developed a taste for our new young plants. They were chewing them right off at the stem. So it's just hard that we weren't really warned about this because no one's experienced it before. So it's all just trying to learn and figure out as we go, for sure.
Definitely. And you talked about the interesting terroir of Jersey. I mean, how does that translate into the taste of the teas you produce?
So what we're finding too, also, we're high enough from the sea that we're not getting the salt, but we are getting the mist and sea air in. So that comes out specifically in our early season green teas, a lot of oceanic notes, very umami, which is absolutely lovely. And we're thinking it's from sitting in the mist, like that's coming right in from the sea. So that's a nice element to have, for sure.
Yeah. And Jonathon, what's the specific character of a Cornwall grown tea?
Well, this is a season's growth. There you go. Look at that. This has all happened in this season. So we all suffered quite a late start in the UK, with spring kind of being delayed. But my word, it's caught up. And that heat wave we all had in, I think, July, wasn't it? We were just measuring incredible growth. It was actually exceeding the growth rate you normally get in a SAM. Okay, it wasn't for such a long period, but it was incredible. So that long season is good. We were actually visited by the Darjeeling Twinning Committee because they thought that we were more than an agricultural estate. Tregothnan may be huge, but it's not actually a city. So we thought it really wasn't right to twin, but in every other way, we love working with Darjeeling. And every day I check the temperature, as you can all do on your phones these days. You can see what the temperature is in real time in Darjeeling. And it's fun just to track all that. And we grow a lot of the other flora that you associate with tea in those other places. So there's 100 acres of botanical garden outside of the tea that kind of encouraged us to believe that we could pioneer tea into the UK. And things like Magnolia campbelli, which you may know as beautiful pink flowers, dinner plate sized flowers. They are one of the great signs that the soil and the air, the environment, the water, everything is suitable for tea. So that kind of indicates the kind of growth conditions we get. And we have 35 of our own tea varieties here. So we are actually having seedlings spontaneously produced. I hadn't expected this to be quite the case. So we started out with over 30 varieties, or jats as they sometimes call them in India. But here we've now got many, many more seedlings which are genetically distinct. So we're giving them good Cornish names. This is one called Trimorna. we can talk about that later, but the prolific amount of seeding we get, and self fertilizing and self propagating. So in years to come, we'll have real British grown tea from stock that was originated here in the UK.
Wonderful. Just quickly to add, so if Darjeeling's the champagne of teas, is Cornwall the carver, or?
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, of course, technically you can't even say champagne because it's a protected region of that part of France, isn't it? But there are so many parallels with good wines and teas, as you well know, and I think you've picked that up in some of your other series, and it's really exciting to be able to have conversations like this with people in the UK who we know we're a nation of tea drinkers, but actually we don't know as much about tea as we should. And it's great to have things like this going on, which helps people understand much more about how wonderful tea is.
Totally agree.
So we've talked a little bit about the cultivation of tea bushes, but that I guess is half the job. And then you've got to turn your lovely green leaf into something that we can then brew. And perhaps I can start with you, Alicia. How have you gone about getting the expertise to actually process leaf into, and I've tasted some of your teas, beautiful teas, I wouldn't have known had not originated in China. How do you go about getting that expertise?
Sure. First off, thank you so much. It was very kind of you to say that what you wrote about my teas in the encyclopedia is just incredible. But yeah, the expertise, it's quite challenging. I mean, they brought me here from America, as Jonathon said, like UK is known for tea drinking, but not a lot of people really know tea. And there's not a lot of people in the West anyways that know how to make tea, especially. So the reason I got into making tea, I had found out they were growing it in Oregon and kind of went to see it and just did some reading on small hand processing and had someone there show me how to do it. And it's a lot of practice. Tea making is not a science, there's not really a manual how to do it. And you can't teach someone the skills of artistry and intuition it takes. But I had then later met Nigel Milliken, who's a tea consultant, on a tea tour of India. And Jersey Fine Tea here had planted the tea, got the bushes established, and then hired him as a consultant. And he had advised them like, well, now you need someone to make the tea. I know a girl in America that makes tea, so I'll have her come over here and help you. So that's what brought me here. But even in my experience looking for assistants to help me out, you can't find anyone that knows how to make tea that's willing to come here and like help out. So I was lucky enough to find someone, a French girl who's very curious, very passionate, knows her tea and willing to do the hard work. Because processing tea is a lot of hard work and takes a lot of skill, a lot of patience, long erratic hours. So brought her in and that was lucky, but we're all still kind of learning together how to do this.
What was your experience, Jonathon?
Well, we're very fortunate. We did a Nuffield farming scholarship. So I have a lot to thank Nuffield for, and did 2 years of hard work, I guess, with them, but it was also great fun and adventure, traveling around the world, visiting the best tea regions. I can't say I went to every tea garden, but I certainly went to every region, and it felt like I'd been to every garden. And it takes a long time. There's thousands of gardens out there, and every factory is slightly different. So you start to realize that there's a lot of art as well as science in tea making, isn't there? And it's really to be celebrated that we can produce a distinctive tea using a blend of techniques from different parts of the world, using different species and cultivars of tea. And really, once you get your head around that, you need lots of mentoring and help from the tea industry itself, which we're very fortunate to have had. So one of the things in the UK's advantage has been that a lot of the tea industry retired back here. And when this news first broke that we were growing tea in England, the Daily Telegraph was suddenly our best friend and ran a piece almost every week on this crazy project. And we had help. It turns out most retired tea planters read the Daily Telegraph, and they came down here to help us. So we, with very rudimentary equipment, were able to really dabble and experiment in quite high. Looking back, I didn't realize what we were trying to do was probably more challenging than I realized. But Dr. Rex Ellis, who famously set up some of the best African tea gardens, he spent days and days down here helping, and if I had to pay for that consultancy, it would have added up to tens and tens of thousands of pounds. So it's very great help from people from all over the world. Peter Leggett, from Camellia PLC, amazing guys in the industry that gave up their time to help us with that challenge, because we don't have access to some of the equipment at that time anyway, 20 years ago. Now it's getting better. We've bought some of the traditional rolling equipment, for example, that was first made by Britannia in Glasgow, shipped out to Darjeeling and places like that. Then when India got independence, they moved the whole foundry out to Calcutta. And now when we bought our rolling plates, we ended up buying them back from Calcutta. They've been made in India using a British mold made in Glasgow. So what goes around comes around, as they say. But I think it's really great to now see some of the new Taiwanese equipment coming through. And some of the sort of new world teas, if you like, are coming up with all kinds of interesting techniques that we're able to dabble with. And we use our off season. We've got a great guy called Tom here to dabble with things like robotics, because like lots of areas we're struggling with finding enough labor. So we've adapted some Japanese tea harvesters and we're putting tracks on them, and they're not really fully robotic, but if you go on our social media, you can see some of the early videos of those actually doing their job this year. And the quality of the pick is certainly better than I can do. After a few hours of picking, I tend to lose concentration, and having a bit of mechanical help can actually really help with the quality as well.
I think that robotics piece is really fascinating across the whole landscape of agriculture. And we talked a little bit about robotics in our episode on iced tea, because largely tea in Argentina is machine harvested, and that's where most of the tea for iced tea is produced. And it's interesting that you say we talked about whether you could get that high quality pick using a machine. You definitely think so.
I'll send you some videos, Sharon. I think there's more work to do, of course, but what the great thing is for us in tea is that the guys doing the really difficult work are already on it. So think of picking a raspberry. The thing they must not do is bruise it. They've got to carry this raspberry, pick it carefully. Well, first of all, select it. It's got to be just the right ripeness without being too soft. Then they've got to get that thing picked and to you, the consumer, without bruising it. Now, those robots are really struggling. That's a difficult job. What we're doing is saying we want all those robots that aren't quite there, that are bruising that raspberry, and give us that robot, because I'm ready to use it on my tea. Because the first thing I do to the tea is bruise it. So we can take all the reject robots from the soft fruit industry and give them a really happy day in tea. And that's basically our game plan. So we're talking to a lot of my colleagues in Nuffield and UK farming generally. We're still pioneering a lot of this. And we're able to take some of those very early first generation, I suppose we're not first generation, early generation robots anyway, and bring them into the world of tea, which is far more exciting anyway.
Totally agree with you. And, the challenges that you've talked about, labor challenges, etc., I mean, they're felt throughout the world of tea. So this kind of investigation could be beneficial for the much wider industry, couldn't it?
Here's the thing, Sharon. In the early days, we had a visit from the Tea Board of India. I should have put their tie on, actually. I was actually wearing their tie for the visit, so we were very honoured to have them here. And purely by coincidence, it wasn't contrived. One of our guys was using a Cornish cauliflower planter to plant tea bushes at the rate of 3 bushes per minute, which doesn't sound a lot, but you try and plant 3 bushes a minute and keep that pace up manually, it's blooming difficult. Anyway, they looked at this thing and thought we were like rocket engineers. It was just one of those great moments. And actually a cauliflower and a tea bush are not dissimilar at that stage. You can they were a bit smaller than this. You can pop them through the cauliflower planter and we can literally plant an acre of tea in not very many hours.
Well, that's interesting, because we had a question for you about, how easy is it to establish a tea bush, both in Cornwall and Jersey? I mean, do you lose a lot that you plant, or do they take well?
Oh, yeah. I mean, in the early days, we were 80% loss rates. Some of that's learning the hard way and, trying to translate into the UK some of the things I learned from overseas doesn't quite work sometimes. some of the aspects are different. Some of the things you read that are absolutely no-nos, actually, they do work. So you do have to break a few rules. But yeah, we now are down to less than 10% loss rates, but it's still expensive. You know, if you want to go and invest in wine growing, it's far, far cheaper than tea. Tea is the most difficult and expensive crop to establish that we know of.
And specifically why?
The tea bushes themselves have a death wish, we've discovered. They are really fickle. We know camellia, as I said, this place pioneered camellia growing in the UK over 2 centuries ago. So we know about camellia, and we thought, well, what can be different about camellia for tea? Because of course that's what the tea bush is. And I can tell you a lot is different about the camellia for tea. They're not, you cannot treat them like an ornamental camellia. So there's a lot of things that they need that camellia bushes wouldn't normally need. So very much more acid. Their need for water is really critical. Too much sun. We lost a whole tea garden due to sunburn because it was reflecting off effectively an inland body of water like a lake. It's actually a tidal river, but it looks like a lake. And when the sun dips down a bit in August, it would get sunburn from above plus what's bounced off the water. They frazzled. And really, that's because tea is an understory species. It's, you know, find it in its natural habitat. It's growing on the forest floor, if you like. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that you need to have a little bit of that botanical knowledge. But look, I don't have all the answers. We've learned a lot. We do share all of this, by the way, on our tea planting and training days. But there's certain things that make me smile because a lot of people don't bother doing their own research and think, oh, well, we've seen a picture of Tregothnan growing tea in a wall garden, so that must be the right thing. It is the worst thing. It's really hard to grow tea in a wall garden.
Well, noted. And Alicia, I mean, similar success rate for you in Jersey?
We've had a different experience. We've had maybe about a 20 to 30% loss rate, and that's mostly due to, like, again, the rabbits eating the plants, the rats eating the plants. We've had a lot of mole activity, which disturbs the roots, and then they can't grab hold, which is unfortunate. There's been one plot that we had that is on the top of a hill that's very exposed to the sea. And a few years ago, they just had a cold front that came in and did kill off most of those that were like really exposed on the top. But other than that, most of our loss isn't due to the terroir external factors. It's more just pests that we're having a hard time dealing with, but hopefully we're getting better at that as we go.
And in your experience, Alicia, did you planted cuttings, did you?
Nope. Most of our plants that are established in the field now were from plant starts. We did do some experimenting with seed and had a bit of a success rate for that. So we put out a few thousand last year, but again, most of those got eaten by rats. But now we have another 3,000 that we started from seed in a glass house that will be going into the ground either next month or in the spring.
And where is that seed from?
It's from Nepal.
Okay. And what was your experience, Jonathon? Did you sort of initially try and go with seed or a sort of hybrid approach?
More hybrid. Well, definitely. We had a lot of clonal cuttings, as they call them, you know, actual plant with known provenance. So that was really important to know the genetic stock to start with. Obviously, the seedlings that we're now getting from our own bushes are their own thing, but we know the parentage at least, so we can sort of help navigate our way through what they might end up being. But we find seedlings too variable and that you can't get that nice consistent look in the tea gardens themselves. So what we tend to do is keep our gardens really small, no more than 2 acres or so a piece, ideally less. So some of the sort of Cornish landscape little valleys suit themselves to being about 1 acre of tea. And the reason for that is that we can have a different variety in each one. And it doesn't look like a monoculture. Within the area, of course, it is a monoculture, but if you then get some sort of pest or disease problem that Alicia's talking about, you can contain it, or you've got a hope of containing it to that one tiny garden. And, you know, you can take heart that once they're established, they are much easier to manage. So if you see those very old tea bushes now in Darjeeling, they are almost excavating out the crown of the where the stem reaches the ground, and they're rejuvenating from below the ground. this is another thing that only Camellia sinensis does, that the other japonicas, etc., wouldn't do. So tea is its own thing. I tell you, they have a character quite distinct from the rest of the Camellia family.
And just for the uninitiated, could you talked about ornamental camellias. So Camellia japonica is the ornamental plant, isn't it, with pretty, is it pink flowers?
Yeah, well, ranging red, pink through white. There's a few really exciting things happening with species of yellows and stuff, but broadly they're white, pink and red. Yeah, but just it is quite complex, Sharon. You've got 30,000 named varieties of camellias, so probably only about 6,000 named varieties of tea. But even that, I can't remember more than about 100 names. It's just incredible. But there are thousands more. And if you go to, I reckon there's probably many, many more that are not even documented. But the interesting thing is there are another group of camellias that are autumn flowering and scented, because normally you think of the spring flowering sort of camellias you mentioned. But there's this whole other group of Camellia sasanqua that flower from about October to Christmas, and they are scented. So what we're doing is starting to hybridize that into the tea. So we'll have some really interesting, hopefully, naturally scented tea coming your way very soon.
How exciting. Really exciting.
Well, so we've got the tea, we've grown it, we've processed it, and then I suppose it's got to get to a customer somewhere. And in many respects, I think, well, supply chains now, matching demand to supply is pretty difficult. Jonathon, if in your case, perhaps, how do you market it? Is it just Cornish tea, or do you blend it in with imported teas, or do you offer a sort of bit of both options?
Our main customer base is single estate tea. So we have a worldwide audience for Tregethnan single estate tea. And we kind of knew that would be the case from the outset. But the great British tea drinker wants a breakfast tea. And you soon learn that your plan or our plan of having single estate green tea and never in tea bags lasted about 2 weeks. And then we had people clamoring for black tea in tea bags. And so one side of us says, well, we could just say tough and, we'll just keep to the very top end of the tea market. But I think that's a wasted opportunity, because part of the plan of introducing tea growing into this part of Europe, or UK anyway, was that we should have an international tea centre and show people some of the mystery of tea and get them involved in tea growing and the factory process and all the stuff we're talking about today. And people are fascinated. They want to see it and get their hands on involved and all that. So our plan was to always have that tea centre capability and show people how you blend tea. Why do you blend tea? Why are the British seen to be masters of tea blending? And it's because of the history. We bought tea from all these different regions. We created brand, and in tea, brand and blend are synonymous. It's the same thing. And one of our heroes, Thomas Lipton, went on to sponsor the America's Cup 5 times on the power of tea. And I think we should pay tribute to the great British pioneers who actually learned the art of tea blending to the extent that, Lipton's today, okay, we may not drink so much in the UK, but in the US, it's still, and parts of Europe, it's still a very widely recognized tea brand. And there's many others you can think of. And I think we wanted to be a consistent brand, as well as being the rarefied single estate changing from year to year. We wanted to have something as well that would appeal to the great British tea drinker. So we actually we won the contract, or the award actually, for, I'll show you a packet in a minute, of the great tea blend for export purposes. So it's essentially a good strong breakfast tea, and that's a blend of our leaves with leaves from Assam in India, and sometimes from Kenya, but not very often, because the Kenyan tea is quite a different characteristic to what we can get from India. But what people are looking for is that good strong malty tea that you get with a breakfast tea, and that is very popular. So we show people how we do it, and we love doing it.
Alicia, if that's the same experience you have in Jersey, or do you concentrate more on the sort of speciality single batch type of approach?
Yeah, right now we're only doing single estate. for now, I do appreciate that blending is something that you can do to increase value in sales. Because, I mean, our experience is kind of different. We just started selling tea and then COVID happened. So it's a bit of a slow start. And to get people into specialty tea in England is a bit challenging. But yeah, we're focusing on just true teas, very high end, very single estate, because we can only have the ability to make small batches at a time, maybe just anywhere between 1 and 3 kilograms. What we'll do is we'll make a few batches and blend, make a few batches and blend, and that's how we package and release it at that. But that's what we're sticking with for now. We're kind of trying to focus on increasing our range, and we're kind of experimenting with making different types of tea, which is helpful. So that's what we're focusing on for now.
And I think there's room for everything in the British cupboard, isn't there? You know, plenty of daily drinking of breakfast blends, but why not try some speciality at the weekend when you've got a bit more time?
I've got a question for Alicia. You're experimenting with different types of tea. What is the most difficult type of tea to make as a tea maker?
So I haven't even tried to do an oolong, basically. I did it a little bit in the United States, but to hand process an oolong it's a lot of work that we're not really capable of doing. So really hoping for at least an oolong roller to get that going. We tried doing some steamed green teas, but again, it's mostly lack of machinery that we need. We need an industrial steamer to really get the steam that you need to do that. I've tried making silver needle tea as well. That one's really challenging. Just the amount of effort that goes into just getting those buds and getting them to taste just right. The fact any of us can drink a silver needle at an affordable cost is just mind-blowing to me. And we're doing some classes in the next few weeks to try to do a few more experimental teas for the rest of the year. So yeah, we'll see. It's really fun. It's my favorite part of tea making, is getting to be a little bit creative, and especially we're in a new tea growing country. So we really have the flexibility to create a new tea, you know, like to establish a flavor of tea that's from Jersey that no one's had before is really exciting.
So on this series of Around the World in 80 Teas, and my own personal bucket list is getting longer and longer, we've talked a little bit of what it's like to visit tea estates. I mean, there's huge potential here. And you've both mentioned running classes, education programs. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, maybe starting with Alicia and then Jonathon, if you want to come in?
Sure. I'll be very short at that. We just recently started doing tours. It's very hard to get organized, especially we're such a small company. So I'm already working all the time to just sort of find the time to organize a tour. But we've just started doing really small tours, 6 people at a time. It's pretty basic. We visit a tea field, go over the plants there. We go back to our processing facility and talk about the different machinery and how the tea turns into the tea that we drink. And then we end with a tasting, which is great. Long term, I would love to do more hands-on classes and workshops and show people how to be able to make the tea. But yeah, we're still kind of a new estate setting up, but I do think that's very important. One, in getting some revenue like coming in, and to let people know we exist and educating people on what tea is, so that they know that we're here and they're more willing to pay the money for a specialty tea because they can see how much effort it goes into it. So I think it's really important, and we're hoping to do things like that in the future.
Yeah, we've had great fun with, and that was part of the business plan anyway, to open up the world of tea. So the tea centre I mentioned is very much up and running in terms of hosting courses, and we have guests most days learning different aspects of tea. So I used to do a lot more of it myself, and I really enjoy that interaction with people, because you think you are in tune with tea drinkers, and then you always learn some new questions or something that you kind of think is obvious and may not be. But we do a whole range of courses, from residentials. We have a suite of holiday cottages that people can stay amongst the tea bushes and, spend a week learning about the process of tea. Because of course it's a multi-day process. You can't just sort of do it all in one day, despite how it might look on television. And, we've hosted dozens and dozens of television companies who want to film the process. So that's been really good. And I think people want to see the home of tea. How did it get pioneered into the UK? And that's been good for us to force that pace a little bit. And to your question about making interesting new teas, we were earlier this year experimenting with a Hojicha, which is one of our more interesting Japanese style teas that we did earlier this year. And we actually gave this to the Japanese Prime Minister during the G7 here in Cornwall. And he sent his delegation out to our little shop in the tea gardens and bought us out of our entire stock. So we must have got it right. But, that's one of the great things of tea, is that we're always going to be learning about new styles and new ways of making tea. And we've got a good range of machinery here now, but it's taken 20 odd years to build that up. And it's, not an easy process by any means, but we get a bit more confident every year. The weather always tries to catch you out, but it's just been fantastic to have that opportunity to have people here and get them really involved in the tea making process.
I mean, from my perspective, I think British grown, and we're just talking about two areas today, Cornwall and Jersey, it's a great opportunity to engage the British public. As you said, Jonathon, we're huge consumers of tea, but actually, and I'll put myself in this as well, we don't know a lot about it, where it comes from, the different types. And I think once people do sort of take that step to engage, they do find it really interesting. And the parallels to learning about something like wine,
it's so important, this point, Sharon. I think we can take many lessons, and quite sobering lessons, from the English wine industry, because it took 40 years to really shake off that image of being not quite as good as some of the other wines, other regions. And tea has this very small opportunity to get it right from the beginning. And I do worry sometimes when you see sort of Me Too people coming in planting tea without, I know they haven't done their research. And some of the things you hear, you think, oh, please, that's going to be expensive. But if we do have these sorts of sessions like this, it's really great for people to understand that tea is a complex subject. It's like wine, it's more complex, in fact. And we need to work together to make sure that we don't encourage a sort of kind of carefree, careless attitude in tea growing, which you have to say English wine came out of in the end, but it took many decades to really become a serious player in the international wine market.
Yeah. But I think it's, also, I mean, we as a nation, we have a very well-established older generation of tea drinkers. We really need to find ways to engage the next generation of tea drinkers. And I think there's huge opportunities here. But if people have the chance to get a bit hands-on with the tea, I think that's really exciting.
And the herbal teas as well. So we've found lots of regions of the UK are better at producing some of the herbals than we are. Now, I know they're not really true tea because they don't come from camellia, but most people would call a chamomile tea, wouldn't they? And I'm not too precious about that. And although we do grow chamomile here, I think some of the other herbs are probably better grown in some of the other areas. Like some of the Scottish herbs are fantastic, and they make really good infusions.
Yeah, it comes back to that piece on terroir, doesn't it? What soil, what conditions suit which particular plants? We could talk all day about it. But unfortunately, I think we're getting close to our end time. Will, do you have any additional questions before we wrap up?
Well, just one for Jonathon. Jonathon, you've told us one of your G7 stories. Was there any other feedback from the world leaders on Tregothan's teas?
There was a bit, actually. I mean, the Prime Minister himself, Mr. Johnson, walked off with one of these tins. I was showing him the latest packaging. He says, well, thank you very much, and walked off with it. So that was a bit of a surprise, but it was served to all the leaders. It was only the Japanese delegation, though, that got their own native tea made here in Cornwall. The rest of them were quite happy to drink our breakfast tea, and also we did a single estate chamomile to help them all go to sleep with their jet lag. So it was, what a great showcasing for British food and drink anyway, but to have the first ever English grown tea on the G7 menu was a great honour for all of us.
Brilliant.
So exciting. Well, Alicia, Jonathon and Will, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us on Around the World in 80 Teas. We hope that you, our watchers, will tune into future episodes and that you've enjoyed this one on British grown tea. Thanks very much.